We're Malaysian, homegrown social enterprise, and believe very, very strongly that every child deserves a great future, and that's what all of our CPD programs are about. So thank you very much for joining us. I think the timing, well, it's coincided with some very difficult moments for Selangor and KL and Putrajaya and for Sabah and for Kelantan. So I think it's definitely very interesting timing and talking about learning. So thank you very much for joining us today. First of all, before I get started, I just want to let everyone know we are recording the session and we will be making it available online later. So while we're doing this webinar is a bit different from your normal webinars. I am not interested in you sitting there and listening to me and taking furious notes. I want you to take part. I'm going to ask questions. So make sure that you're thinking and listening and taking part rather than furiously writing. Because if there are any strategies that will work for you later, they will be available online for you to rewatch and share with your colleagues. So we will be recording. If you don't want your face recorded, just turn off your camera and all will be well. So who am I? My name's Hayley. I work for LEAPED. Usually we're based down in the Bangsar area of KL. At the moment, obviously, we're all working from home. So I work in our head office team, and one of my core passions is staff CPD and teacher development. So before this, I was teaching in an international school and then principal of an international school. And now my greatest joy is to work with teachers and middle leaders, especially, on making sure that teaching and learning in the classroom is child-centered and effective. And really, that is what I'm all about. I want teaching not just to be fun. I'm not interested in fun. I'm interested in effective learning. And that is what our webinar today is all about. So before we get started, I'd really like if you could help me out by answering this very, very short poll, which I'm now displaying. Just would like to know, there are 3 questions. What kind of school are you from? How are you managing online learning at the moment? And finally, how are you feeling? So I've had 1 vote so far, which is great. I'm going to leave this up for about 1.5 minutes. It will just give me a chance to get to know who I've got in the room. So one of the things about effective CPD is that you've got to know your learners. And I think with online learning and webinars especially, that can be particularly difficult. When I'm in the face-to-face training, we would have, 15 minutes before the workshop to chat, to get to know each other. Online learning, there is none of that opportunity. So a quick poll is a really, really good way just to gauge how things are going, because everybody is fighting their own battle at the moment, and your students in their classes especially. So my first kind of top tip for a positive learning environment is don't forget the human connection. Don't forget the opportunity for that chit chat, for that checking in. And if you can find a quick technological way of doing that, do. The other tools that I have in my kit, please use the chat box. If I'm talking too fast, if you want me to clarify something, I have the chat box visible to me, so please do use the chat box. And there are also on Zoom some reactions. There's a reaction button that you can use. So if I'm saying something that makes sense, please do give me a thumbs up. Let me know that I'm not talking nonsense. Thank you, Nora. I can see the thumbs up from here. It's just reassuring to me. Thank you, Marnie. It's reassuring to me as a facilitator to know that I'm not talking to a blank screen. And I'm sure as teachers facilitating online at the moment, you can understand where I'm coming from. Okay, I'm going to display these votes. So let's have a look. Who have we got in the room? We have got most of our teachers in the room are from Trust School, which is brilliant. So loads of the strategies that we talk about today will be familiar to you. We've got a few people from non-Trust School, a couple of international schools, which is brilliant. And then how are you managing online learning? So live virtual classes, 6 people. Setting work via WhatsApp, we've got 4. Combination of both, we've got about 16, which is great, because we're going to be talking about strategies for both those kinds today. And how are you feeling? This is the million-dollar question, right? How are we all feeling at the moment? We've got 9 people saying they're loving it, which is superb. 13 people was like, yeah, it's okay. Nobody is sad, which is superb, because teaching is a privilege. It shouldn't be a chore. And I think sometimes we forget that it's supposed to be an enjoyable thing that we're all doing. So one of the things that teachers are doing at the moment, we are moving everything we know from the classroom onto online. And that is what I'm going to do today with our session. So your first kind of activity that we're going to do is we're going to talk about, in a normal world, what was it like? What is a normal positive learning environment? What were kind of some of the features that a normal positive learning environment had? I've put some pictures up here for things that I think make a very positive learning environment. I've got collaborative group work. I've got a beautiful classroom with displays and keywords. I've got children learning together with their mini whiteboards. For me, these pictures exemplify a positive learning environment. I also think a teacher who wants to be there is a really positive learning environment. Has anyone got any other suggestions? If you want to put them in the chat box, that would be great. So we're going to use a collaborative learning structure that usually I would use this in a classroom, but we're going to do it online in our webinar today. So I did say that there's going to be no sitting back and just listening. You've got to take part. So we're going to play share and turns. I'm going to put you in a breakout room. The question is, what is a normal positive learning environment? And you're going to work in your breakout rooms to answer that question. So you're going to go one by one, by one, by one, and you're going to try and say something different from the person who spoke before. So I've just allocated the rooms, and there is at least one person from LEAPED in each room. So if the conversation takes some time to get going, I'm looking to you guys to make a positive learning environment and get people involved. So the question is, what makes a positive learning environment? What does it mean to you? And you're going to have about 3 minutes only to share these ideas in your breakout room. So introduce yourself. What does a positive learning environment mean to you? And after 3 minutes, I'm going to bring you back. Okay, let's have a look. We're going to open all the rooms, and I will see you in about 3 minutes. So what does a positive learning environment mean to you? Hello, welcome back.
Hi.
Hi, I hope you managed to have a conversation. Any ideas that you came from your group? If you could drop them in the chat box, that would be brilliant. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. So any ideas that you had from your chat rooms, please drop them in the chat box. So the question is, what does a positive learning environment mean to you? We'll just wait for the rooms to close. All right, everyone should be back in the room now. Okay, so the question was, what does a positive learning environment mean to you? So we've got one idea in the box already, engaging and fun. If you agree with that, could you use your reactions and give me a thumbs up or a clap? You can either there we go. I can see a multitude of thumbs there. So two-way communication. How about that one? Two-way communication, not just one person. Yeah, we've got a few thumbs up for that. Any more ideas, please put them in the chat box. We've got engaging and fun, two-way communication. Oh, we got one here. Safe emotionally and physically. That's very interesting. I'm going to come on to that in a minute. Enjoying learning. That's, I think, a really, really key one. Student-centered. Keeping them engaged, achieving the learning objective, absolutely, active engagement, learning objectives achieved, bonding with students, both parties happy to be at school, the teachers and the students. I totally agree with that. I can see a thumbs up there from a few people. Respecting one another. I think that's, and again, speaks to emotional belonging, and we've got a sense of belonging and trust. Well, that's really interesting because I totally agree with what everyone's been saying. I guess the million-dollar question is, how on earth do we create that in an online space? So this is a visual that I use in face-to-face training. I talk about physical environment and emotional environment, and how those two things work hand in hand to create a positive learning environment in the classroom. We're now being asked to transition out of the classroom and be put into a Zoom box. And for all teachers, actually, the Zoom box is not always possible because our students have device issues, there's internet connection issues. How on earth, as a teacher, do we try and replicate the safety of our classroom in this online space? Because if you get the physical environment right, the emotional environment right, the student behavior takes care of itself, largely. And the student learning takes care. How is student behavior at the moment with online learning? Anecdotally, I've heard teachers say it's difficult to get children engaged. It's difficult to get kids completing work. I've heard horror stories from parents pulling their hair out, not knowing how to get the kids to do stuff. So I guess the question for us as professionals and as educators is, how can we use our professionalism and our skills in learning to make this online space effective? Because students don't have enough time for this. We've already had online learning for what, 4 months already, and now again for many, many parts of Malaysia. So we haven't got a lot of time. So I'm guessing as teachers, we've got two questions. We've got questions. What does it mean to have a positive learning environment online? That's the first question. And then the second question is there any research or any ideas from other people that we can replicate? And I guess there's good news and bad news on this. So the first thing I think is really important is to understand what we mean by online learning. There are two types of online learning, and both can be effective. There is absolutely no evidence that 6 hours of Zoom lesson is effective. In fact, far from it. We know as adults, virtual meetings are hard. They're hard on the eyes, they're hard on the brain. 6 hours back to back learning online, that's not effective online learning. But virtual classrooms can be useful in their small amounts. So you've got two types. You've got your asynchronous learning and your synchronous learning. This webinar is an example of synchronous learning. I'm going to make you talk to each other. I'm going to make you discuss with each other. That's synchronous. But some people will watch this video back at a later time, and that is asynchronous learning. So learning that takes place all together, synchronous, at different times, asynchronous. And there are positives and negatives to both of those models. You can't use only one. You have to use a combination. And that would be my first piece of kind of online learning teaching advice. Don't think that as a teacher, you have to be present all the time. You don't. Allow the children to work in groups, or allow the children to work on projects without your direct supervision. And that comes down to trust. Can you trust your students to do that? And there are some checks and balances you can put in to help with that trust. But teachers don't need to be visible 100% of the time to have effective participation. So, how can we make it positive? There are two pieces of research that I have used when I created this webinar. The first one was from the EEF and the second one was from John Hattie. And I'm going to send you those links after the session because they're fascinating pieces of reading. I believe very strongly that teachers need to use research, and these two pieces of research is what I've used to plan this webinar. The research also says, quite honestly, it's often the case that teachers are finding creative solutions. There is no one way to do online learning. Every teacher is trying and experimenting and seeing what works, which is why in many ways, as teachers, we also have to be researchers at this time and find out. But what matters, it matters what we do. What we do matters, not the medium of doing it. It doesn't matter if you're on Teams, if you're on Zoom, if you're on Google Hangouts. I'm not interested in what. I'm interested in how you're doing it. How is it working? Are you making it work for you? It doesn't matter if it's Telegram or WhatsApp. What matters is the stuff. And that has been true in the classroom, and it's true online. So I think that should be the first reassuring thing. As professionals, we know a positive learning environment. Our job now is to translate that into the online world. And I'm going to share a few things with you today. So the first thing, these are John Hattie's top tips for distance learning. Social interaction. If you can get your students talking and interacting with each other, you are one step to effective online learning. If you can get your students timely feedback, you can tell them what they've done well and what they need to do better next time. Second step, balancing knowledge and skills is also really, really important. Questioning your impact, collaboration. But the most important thing is putting yourselves in the shoes of your learners. Today, in this webinar, you are an online learner. How are you feeling about that? What is making it easy for you to take part? What is making it hard for you to take part? This whole experience of joining the webinar, of finding the link, of taking part, of talking, whatever you are feeling now is what your students will be feeling. There will be things that I do that work for you, and there will be things that don't. Remember that, because you can use that when you are teaching your own students. And I think that is one of the most important things. Students are no different from us. Just seen a message, for example, just seen a message from Sheila. It says, unstable internet connection, frustrating. 100%. It's the most frustrating thing. Your students will be feeling that as well. Students not having devices will be frustrating to you. It will be frustrating to them. So it's all about us being in it together and understanding what it's like to be a learner online. So we've only got a very short amount of time today, and I've given you kind of an overview of how I feel about it, but I want to give you some tangible strategies. And I'm going to start with one very, very, very brief one, which is just a little bit of creative thinking. Can you show me a thumbs up if you, in your classroom, have a display? Do you put up display in your classroom? Just give me a reaction button, thumbs up, if you do have a display in your classroom. If you put up a keyword. I've got Clarine's got her thumb up, which is brilliant. Anyone else? There must be more than that. I can't believe it. Wong's got their hand up. So Zarina, absolutely. Displays are lovely things. Thank you, Anne. I've got your thumbs up now. Displays are lovely things. In that first picture, I showed you, there was keywords up on the wall. That is a positive classroom learning. What about you get the students to do that at home? There's no reason, if the students are learning from their bedrooms or if they're learning from their kitchen, see if their parents will let them make a display of their work. It can be as simple as putting pictures on the fridge. But so many students are making lots of beautiful things and it's not being celebrated. Is there a way that you could set a task that would allow those students to display their work? So this is a bright idea we came up with a little while ago, and it was word wall. So it's a task to learn vocabulary lists. For English, it could be for Malay, it could be for Mandarin, it could even be for science or maths. When you have a list of words to use, instead of asking them to memorize the words, can they draw it offline, off the computer, and put it up somewhere they can see it? It's a very simple and creative way to use that positive learning environment and move it into the home. It's also a way, you've got a background behind you. Have you ever thought of printing out your students' work and putting it behind you where they can see it? Or alternatively, sharing on a WhatsApp group a photograph of a really, really good piece of work. These are ways that you can use classroom displays online. Rules and routines, the same. At the start of this, parents were reporting being very, very overwhelmed. Do you have set rules and routines for your classroom that will help them understand. For example, if you've got WhatsApp groups, many messages come in on a WhatsApp group. If there is one very important message, consider making your profile picture that message so that parents can find it very quickly. Telegram is a broadcast channel. Key messages can be really easily found on Telegram. It's not about the kind of messages, it's how easily we can find them. Google Sites is a fantastic starting point for a single piece. This is a Google site we made for our Bright Ideas right at the very start of March. Right at the very start of March, we made this Google site, which was a single place for all the work to be had. It could be Google Classroom, it could be Teams. We really liked Google Site, and the reason was because for Google Site, we also wanted our students to make e-portfolios. And Google Site is really free and intuitive for students to use. Now I'm going to tell you a story. Last year, I did online learning. It was with the University of Maryland, and it was about instructional design, and I hated it. I hated every single minute of my online learning. I thought it was boring. I thought it was irrelevant. But they asked us to do one very simple thing. They asked us to put all of our work on a Google site. This is mine. This is a picture of my Google site. And now I look back and I've got 8 weeks of really quality work that I look at now and I'm proud of. I'm really glad that I kept my work in a portfolio that I'm able to see. And that's one thing about online learning, is that the students don't have an exercise book to be proud of. Is there any way that we can use technology to recreate that form? So on my Google site, all the work I did is very beautifully set out, week 1, week 2, week 3. And I've now got a catalogue and I can see my journey. And students sometimes need to see their journey too. And that's one reason we have exercise books and we don't have exercise books at the moment. So an e-portfolio is something you can do with Google Sites. Students can make them themselves and they can categorize their work week on week so that they can see their journey. Another way to collect work for an e-portfolio is to have a WhatsApp chat just for submission of work. Children can see the work that's being submitted and it doesn't get mixed up with everything else. Sometimes WhatsApp groups get very messy. And so it's nice to have a channel just to keep students' work. An email account that they can keep and see their progress and their journey. So there's a kind of some simple examples of how we can use what we know and teach them to make it work online. That's a classroom display and an exercise book. And I need to use technology to recreate my classroom display and to recreate my exercise book. It doesn't have to be complicated. The one advantage we do have is that as teachers, we are not digital natives, but our children, our students are. And it is perfectly acceptable to set an independent learning task, especially in secondary school, for them to work out how to do it themselves. They will have apps that they want to use. They might want to make video diaries. They might want to make picture diaries. It's not how they do it that's important. It's the doing it. So for example, a reflection journal. A reflection journal can be created using a hand phone and a video, just telling me what you learned that day. But some students might want to use a podcast. Some students might write it down. Some students might want to make a comic strip. It doesn't matter to me how it's done. What matters to me is what is done. And that is a really key thing for online learning. We've created an opportunity for our students to choose, what they want to do and to be independent and powerful in their learning. As a teacher, the content matters to me, not the execution. Next sort of thing is about knowing your students. In a classroom, I will see the students coming through the door every day, and I will see the look on their face. I will know if they had a good day. I will know if they had a bad day. I will know that he is a Manchester United supporter and they suffered a 7-1 defeat last night, so he will. I know that about my students, but when we're online, I've got literally no idea. So try and find some ways to find out how they are doing. There can be a tendency for survey overload, but knowing the situation can make things better and being empathetic. So again, this is another bright idea that we developed. The end of day check-in. So this can be done through a Google form, or it can be done through a WhatsApp message. To feed back to you at the end of every day or the end of every week how they're doing. One thing that was interesting, one thing that they worked hard on, one thing that they are finding hard. The reason for this is because sometimes when, as teachers, we get sent work and we look at it and we think, I don't know what that is. That's a bit, this student didn't spend any time on this. But actually, they spent hours and they found it really hard. So finding a way to ask them is a great way so that you know how to respond. If in the end of day check-in they say they've argued with their mother all day and their brother's been driving them crazy, your feedback can be more empathetic. If they tell you, and students are very honest, if they tell you that they are that they didn't do hardly anything and they were distracted by PlayStation, you can feed back to them and say, oi, do some more work. Just by asking the question sets it up. This is a Google form that we made. So Google, even for very young learners, you don't have to use text in a Google form. You can upload images. So just like the poll I did with you guys at the start with the grumpy face, the sad face, you can create that on Google Forms. And emojis are a really fun way to get a temperature check of how your students are doing. So basically, what I'm asking you to do is I'm asking you to wiggle. What do I mean by wiggle? Nothing that I've told you is new. You are professionals, you are teachers. When we're talking about online learning, we need to take what we know in the classroom and make it wiggle so that you can use the technology. It's not about the technology, it's about how you use it. So, for example, student ownership. Student ownership is how much investment students have in their learning. It might be the topics, they might be the methods, it might be the places where learning happens, it might be shared goals, relevant, self-driven outcomes. Relevance is key here, very, very key. So my question is, how can I make a topic relevant to my students? And this was one that we came up with a few months ago, and that was writing a letter. Instead of just writing a fictional letter, we gave them a person to write the letter to. We gave them a criteria for success. We gave them an objective, and we asked them to send it. And that was really important. It was the action of sending the letter that made it relevant. So my curriculum requires students write a letter. It doesn't matter what the letter is about. And then I gave some feedback. So this was my letter. Dear teacher, I miss you. I want to say thank you. I like my writing with my mummy. Love from Hayley. Now I could have left it just as saying, oh, thank you. That's a very nice letter. But actually, it's not the action of writing the letter that is important. It's the feedback that you get on the letter. Because it's not the task itself very often, it's the feedback you receive on the task. So I used my criteria for success to mark the letter. I included the address, the date, a greeting. Why are you saying thank you? Good wishes to the receiver. And this was the feedback I gave. It was just a very simple WhatsApp message to the parent that took me no time to write. The address, the date, a greeting, why I'm saying thank you, and I color coded it. I made sure to say thank you because as a teacher, it's important we're also empathetic. Acknowledging parent effort, making the task social, feedback, and some way to act on the feedback and get the students to do it again. So if you notice on this letter, there is one spelling mistake on there. I spent May wrong. So what I've written in my feedback is I've written, well done, you've written a lovely letter, and I've acknowledged that they worked hard. Most of my spellings are good, but check the months of the year. And now revise the spelling of the month of the year and send me a second draft. So they're doing the task, they're taking feedback via WhatsApp, and then they're doing it again. And John Hattie says that the biggest single modification that a teacher can make is giving consistent and honest feedback. Teachers spend too much time worrying about the content of the lessons and not enough time worrying about the feedback. And if we concentrated more time on giving feedback, our learning objectives would be far, far easier to measure. Because nobody gets anything right first time. Why should they? This is learning. So if you can find a way to give good feedback, that will increase your learning outcomes. Because, and so to do that, I used a PowerPoint slide, a snipping tool, and WhatsApp web. Very, very simple. Nothing crazy technology, nothing in particular. It was a really simple way for me to give feedback to that child in a really simple way. You can use Teams. You can use Mailman. There are lots of free apps, but even for people who are worried technologically, it doesn't have to be overcomplicated. So it's relevant because they've written a letter for a reason, but more importantly, they've had the feedback. And I think that's really, really important. And on our Bright Ideas, we've published a few different relevant learning tasks like the movie review, meal time, public service announcements. These are all practicing skills from the curriculum, but in a relevant way. Right, I've talked a lot. I've talked about displays. I've talked about student ownership. I've talked about know your student. What I'd like to do now is I'd like to put you back into your breakout rooms for 5 minutes. And I would like you to discuss with your peers how you can make learning relevant in your classroom. Now, I know for example, that Telangana is safe. I know that you guys are not doing online learning, but the topic of this webinar is creating positive online learning environments. Just because students are in the classroom does not mean online learning is out the window. You need to keep going. And there are still some things you can do. So I'm going to give you 5 minutes. I'm going to time you. And you're going to be with the same people again. And I would like you to think about how you can make learning relevant to yours. Okay. I'm going to open up the rooms. Perfect, thank you. I managed to get around about 3 breakout rooms. I heard a lot of people talking about students understanding the purpose behind doing things, which sounded really great. And I think that was, I can't remember who it was, but I think Mr. Param was talking about relevance in the science lab, which I thought was fascinating. And I also overheard Miss Zarina talking about moving beyond exams and making it more than just an examination. And I think that that's really interesting opportunity that online learning has given us to give some kind of real world skills. Okay, so that's pretty much my whirlwind webinar. So what I wanted to do was talk to you about positive learning environments. And I know what everyone's going to say is there's not enough time. There's not enough time. I know, definitely not enough time. But we've talked very briefly about classroom displays. I've talked very briefly about rules and routines. That's for the teacher's sanity more than the student's sanity, getting into routines. Knowing your students, remembering those small touches, that check-in. And then that student ownership. How can students find relevance in their work? And I think that's 4 really, really, really good places to start. I think the other thing to remember about online learning is that imperfections are not inadequate. You will try something and it won't work. That is inevitable with online learning. They're reminders that we're all in this together, and we are. As a teaching profession, we've got to help each other. So John Hattie says the most single powerful modification that you can make is feedback. Don't be scared to take feedback from your students as well. If you can find a safe and respectful way for your students to give you feedback on your lessons, it will be so valuable to your practice. It's brave, and sometimes we don't like what we have to hear. But you know what? We're grown-ups, we're adults. Sometimes kids need to tell us the truth, and that's okay. Because if feedback for children is going to make them best, feedback for us is going to make us strong as well. So these were the 6 tips I started at the start. If you can find a way for social interaction, if you can find a way for feedback, balancing skills and knowledge, questioning your impact, collaborating, and remember what it's like to be an online learner. Put yourselves in the learner's shoes. All of these things will be a great way to start with by creating an online learning environment. Okay, before we go, I'm going to set you one more question. It's a brave question, but the single most powerful thing about online learning and getting yourselves better is by taking feedback. So I need to take some feedback on my webinar as well. So I've talked to you an hour. How was it? Bit overwhelmed, a bit grumpy, it makes me sad. Yeah, it's okay, I love it, perfect. This has been really, really valuable feedback for me as well. And like I said, this is the most important thing. Just because you get some things wrong, it's not an inadequacy. We just need to keep trying. And any way that we can find to move and pivot things for our students, the better. So, but this is a final thought, trust your struggle. It is tricky. And I know that, you know, a lot of teachers are going back into online learning. It is trust it, but don't let the technology overwhelm you. You are good teachers, you know what you're doing, and get the technology to work for you would be my biggest piece of advice. All right, any questions before I let you all go back to your day? Thank you very much for that comment, Clarine. Made you rethink many things. It feels like we're locked down again. We survived. We will actually survive. We have survived once. This is the key thing for this part of the lockdown. We have done it once. We will do it again. Thank you, Zarina. Can we have more sessions? Yes, there are 4 sessions coming up. I haven't got the. Here they are. We've got 3 more sessions. We've got one with Rashida on the 21st of October. Bo is on the 4th of November. And Shoba is on the 18th of November. These webinars are upcoming. We also have this event tomorrow, the Teach Meet Malaysia. Teach Meet Malaysia is an amazing initiative where we've started getting teachers together to share practical strategies. So it's not people like me talking, it's actual teachers who actually know what they're doing. They get 5 minutes to share an idea, and we've got these wonderful professionals tomorrow from across Malaysia who are coming together. And we also have an in-depth learning CPD program, which myself and my colleague Raj will be taking starting next week, which is strategies for learning in the new normal, getting students to collaborate online, providing effective feedback online, and making sure that learning is impactful when it's blended. We got Foundation for Coaching coming up as well. But I'll leave you with that one because that's the dates coming up. Absolutely, Tiao, we do need more time for discussion. And if you come to my longer course, we have more time. But in a short webinar, what can you do in an hour, really? So let me have a look. Bit overwhelmed. Oh, I'm sorry, I've got one person who's feeling a bit overwhelmed by today's session. But the majority of people are very happy with what we've done today. So thank you very much. If you are feeling overwhelmed, do reach out to someone in LEAPED. We are more than happy to give tips and advice. We also have so many webinars recorded from previous MCO madness that are all available on our website. And you can access if you need some more kind of top tips. So yeah, thank you very, very much, everybody, for coming. And I hope to see you again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.